My name is Mbongeni Ngema, and you are watching South Africa Now.
Global Vision presents the television news magazine of Southern Africa.
It doesn't exist on television, and it doesn't exist.
I would actually appeal to the world that information is there and can be found.
Because it is important that people know what is happening.
This week, South Africa Now reports these stories. Commemorations of the Sharpeville Massacre and unrest in South Africa. This is one of America's most secret military testing grounds. A man who worked here gave away classified information to South Africa. We'll tell you the story of a spy for apartheid.
It was foolish and misguided and it was wrong, but he didn't do it for money. He received no monies for it whatsoever. He did it out of what he thought was patriotism.
And as United Nations peacekeeping troops enter Namibia, we launch a new weekly segment. We call it Namibia Watch.
Independent reports in Namibia reveal that the Pretoria regime is presently granting citizenship to non-Namibians in a desperate attempt to deny SWAPO the victory it is destined to win.
And in our culture section, Mbongeni Ngema, the creator of Serafina, speaks out.
I don't think you can separate politics and art in South Africa.
All this and more on South Africa Now with your hosts, Fana, Kekana, and Mweli Mzizi.
Mwalelepo. 29 years ago, police opened fire on unarmed demonstrators protesting the past laws at the police station in a place called Sharpeville. 69 died, and the fight against apartheid entered a new stage. This year, there were commemorations that led to violent confrontations in the Durban area and observances in New York. Nadja Smith reports.
Witwatersrand University, Johannesburg. Students commemorate the anniversary of the Sharpeville Massacre. Signs support banned organizations, including the ANC and the MK, the movement's armed wing. Riot police were on hand, but did not intervene, as a symbolic graveyard was established on campus to commemorate the dead. At the United Nations in New York, liberation movement leaders and diplomats gathered to open an anti-apartheid exhibit that will travel worldwide.
It's my pleasure to welcome you, Mr. Ambassador Garba, ladies and gentlemen, to this new exhibit on the fight against apartheid. Today is the day to focus on racial discrimination and the need to eradicate this evil anachronism.
On hand for the formal ceremony that followed was Johnson Mlambo, chairman of the Pan Africanist Congress, or PAC, the organization that called the protests at Sharpeville in 1960 and is now celebrating its 30th anniversary.
Sharpeville was decisively a turning point in the struggle of our people. The vehicle for genuine change in our country can never be the racist regime, nor even the white minority exclusively, but the main vehicle for genuine change in our country remains the oppressed masses of our country. And the task of any serious liberation movement, therefore, is that one of building up the fighting capacity of these people.
The PAC leader, who spent 25 years in prison on South Africa's notorious Robben Island, told South Africa Now he is optimistic about the future.
My faith, in particular, that we will emerge victorious, has been strengthened. And in this regard, I could cite the fact that the first campaign that the PAC waged, even before March 21st, against the past laws, was a campaign of mental liberation, that our people must believe that they are not the inferiors that they have been made to feel they are, and that they are the equals of any other person.
This is Nadja Smith for South Africa Now.
The man who has been on hunger strike the longest, Sandile Thusi, has suspended his fast after 37 days because of deteriorating health. But spasms of unrest and prisoner escapes in protest against detention without trial continue in South Africa. Letebele Masemola has our story.
This was the headline of the week. 4 hunger strikers slipped out of a Johannesburg hospital taking refuge in the West German embassy in Pretoria. To avoid a diplomatic incident, the government released them, claiming 2 already had their release papers signed. The men met the press.
We call on our people and the organizations within the broad mass democratic movement in our country to continue and step up their democratic opposition to the system of apartheid. We also call upon all democratic-minded and peace-loving South Africans to condemn the system of detention without trial and emergency rule. We further call upon progressive people the world over to multiply international pressure at all levels against the apartheid regime.
Last week, we told you about this hunger striker, Labour leader Dolce Khumalo, seen here on the McNeil-Lehrer NewsHour in 1987. He too was released after his union threatened mass action, but he was promptly served with an order restricting his activities. We obtained a copy, and it says in part, under Regulation 38BI of the Security Emergency Regulations, you shall not take part in any interview or make calls or encourage or incite disinvestment from the Republic. In all, 18 specific restrictions are itemized in the document. In New York, meanwhile, politicians announced a one-day sympathy hunger strike. Manhattan Borough President David Dinkins.
Well, yes, I'm fasting tomorrow in support and solidarity with the brothers and sisters imprisoned, detainees in South Africa, and it's for that reason that I'm doing it. And the whole idea is to focus attention on what's going on in South Africa. It seems to me it's the very least that we can do here.
This is Letebele Masemola reporting for South Africa Now.
There are new charges that the South African police are looking the other way as vigilantes, warlords, and black organizations hostile to the anti-apartheid movement carry on a campaign of terror and violence in South Africa's Natal province. Many of the violent incidents have been linked to Inkatha, the Zulu organization headed by Chief Gatsha Buthelezi, who is an official of one of South Africa's homelands. The Congress of South African Trade Unions, South Africa's largest labor federation, recently issued a new report on the issue. Mweli Mzizi has our story.
Black-on-black violence is what the government and media call it. But COSATU, the million-member labor federation, says it's not racial but political. COSATU leader Jay Naidoo.
There's been very detailed discussions within our own ranks, both as COSATU and the UDF, given the problems that we have of having meetings. And at this point in time, we are ready to take major initiatives to end the violence.
Look at this chart. It lists violent deaths in the last 2 years. Local newspapers tell the same story. Whites-led attack, woman burned to death.
Let us look at the Mphophomeni case. There, 4 trade unionists were taken, kidnapped, and particularly cruelly killed by an identified group of Inkatha supporters. No charges were laid. Nobody was arrested for that crime. 2 years later, a magistrate named certain Inkatha personalities as directly responsible for the killing of those 4 trade unionists. To this date, they have not been charged.
Investigators say the reign of terror is the work of police vigilantes and this movement, Inkatha, led by Chief Gatsha Buthelezi. Nominally a Zulu cultural movement, Inkatha has a military wing, allegedly made up in part of brutal warlords. Blade Ndzimande of the University of Natal explains.
And warlords, as we call them, in Natal, are freely walking and committing these acts, and there is no action that seems to be taken against them. And
Inkatha seems particularly threatened by the spread of the non-tribal United Democratic Front and COSATU movements.
And Inkatha is seen by quite a substantial number of people as being on the side of the state, of the government. And then you have on the other side anti-apartheid activists. Many of them are either affiliates or in organizations that are affiliate of the now restricted United Democratic Front or the Congress of South African Trade Unions. So it's not simply black on black violence. You know, I mean, the issue at stake is forces against apartheid and forces for apartheid.
And COSATU reports document a number of attacks that have gone uninvestigated and unpunished.
In my view, it is only necessary for the police to fail to arrest or to bungle investigations and prosecutions to sustain vigilantes. But there is also ample evidence provided in Martin's report of a more direct collusion.
Each week we bring you coverage of Namibia as it prepares for independence. This week we are joined by Namibian author and scholar Joseph Disho, who will be providing reports and analysis of the events affecting the country in our new weekly special segment, Namibia Watch.
Plans for Namibia's independence are being set in motion as the United Nations peacekeeping forces begin to monitor the transition and the preparation for the November elections. At the United Nations on March 21st, Namibia was discussed at a ceremony commemorating the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. A number of speakers called for vigilance by the United Nations, including Zambia's ambassador, Peter Zuze.
Independent reports in Namibia reveal that the Pretoria regime is presently granting citizenship to non-Namibians in a desperate attempt to deny SWAPO the victory it is destined to win. The regime has also engaged in the intimidation of the local population in northern Namibia, warning them against voting for SWAPO. In this evil exercise, many thousands of Angolans belonging to the UNITA bandit group are being registered as Namibians and being instructed to vote against SWAPO.
An African National Congress spokesman, James Stewart, amplified the need for enforcement of the UN Resolution 435.
The African National Congress appeals to the international community, to all governments and nations, to maintain a high level of vigilance, to ensure the strict and full implementation of the letter and the spirit of UN Security Council Resolution 435, to closely monitor the independence process, and especially the elections.
The Southwest Africa People's Organization, SWAPO, voiced their concerns as well. SWAPO representative Helmut Angula.
Pretoria will try to use the vast colonial infrastructure she over the years elected in Namibia to frustrate the aspiration of our long tormented people.
You are watching South Africa Now, the television news magazine that goes behind the headlines. Coming up next, a South Africa Now exclusive report.
Spies. Every country has them, and South Africa is no exception. But what you may not know is that the South African government has mounted major espionage operations in the United States. And now, for the first time, an American has pled guilty to passing military secrets to Pretoria. South Africa Now's investigative editor, Eric Nadler, reports this week on A Spy for Apartheid.
Riots in the streets. Warfare in Angola. Isolated internationally, South Africa's rulers are determined to fight back with whatever it takes, including espionage in America's most secret military research centers. This is not a story that you've heard before.
The South African Embassy in Washington, D.C. The United States government extends full diplomatic courtesies to the Pretoria government. Yet, out of this building during the early years of the Reagan administration, the South African military conducted a full-scale espionage operation targeting America's top defense secrets. In this report, we'll tell you about a spy for South Africa.
Our story starts here in the sleepy suburb of Havre de Grace, Maryland, a Chesapeake Bay community virtually next door to the Aberdeen Proving Grounds, a center for top-secret weapons testing and development. Our story is about a man who lived here, remembered this way by his next-door neighbor.
He was sort of nervous like. Just always in a hurry and sort of jittery. There's many times I would come in like 10 or 11 at night and he would just be sitting up there in the chair, you know, in this front room.
Mrs. Wiggins is talking about Tom Dolce, also pronounced Dolce, a mathematician, civilian weapons analyst, and the first American convicted of spying for South Africa. Tom Dolce gave secrets to South Africa, and he did it for the love of apartheid, not money. says federal prosecutor Gary Jordan.
Mr. Dolce's statement has been that he did this for ideological reasons. He had been a long-term supporter of South Africa. He felt that the United States should be more supportive of South Africa than it was being in terms of sharing technology and secrets, and he took it upon himself to provide that information to the South Africans.
Dolce's own lawyer, Harold Glazer, said Dolce thought he was being patriotic.
Thought he was doing it as a loyal citizen, as a United States citizen, and thought that the United States was in fact not protecting or not working with a very close ally, South Africa.
Dolce's story made the papers, but the details spelled out in this court document offer an inside look at how the espionage game works. Dolce, seen here in his college yearbook, went to South Africa in the early 70s. He liked the system and wanted to help. In 1978, he sent the South Africans a paper that he wrote on sabotage.
And received a response from the military attaché at the embassy, inviting him to come down and to discuss it with him. And at that meeting, Mr. Dolce was encouraged by the military attaché to provide additional information about different Army weapon systems, starting in the fall of 1979 and continuing through 1983. Mr. Dolce provided a variety of classified documents to 3 successive military attachés of the South Africans at their embassy in Washington.
Dolce would now drive the 95 miles from his home to Washington for face-to-face meetings with his covert handlers at the embassy. He was told only to call them from pay phones for security reasons. He sent documents to secret mail drops in Washington, Beverly Hills, and even London. The South Africans apparently liked the secrets that Dolce was handing over. 2 military attachés invited him over to their house in suburban Maryland on weeknights and on weekends, where Dolce personally delivered batches of classified material. What did the South Africans want from Dolce? Retired U.S. Admiral Jean Larocque, head of the Center for Defense Information in Washington, D.C., has studied the Dolce case.
Yes, Aberdeen is a proving ground for small arms, handguns, artillery, the sort of weapons which you would use to control your own population. It also, though, would be useful if you were going to be waging war, for example, in Angola or Namibia. That kind of information, that ballistic information, would be available from a place like that.
The FBI never caught Dolce in the act, but they did nab him inadvertently.
And it was through an association of his, another South African who was under the government's awareness. Let me put it that way.
2 FBI counterintelligence agents knocked on Dolce's door one afternoon in April of 1988.
They confronted him, and over the course of the next 3 days, they interrogated him, and he eventually confessed to having engaged in such espionage over the course of 4 years between 1979 and 1983.
This Senate Intelligence Committee report notes that there was South African espionage suspected at the time, and that a South African defense attaché was officially declared persona non grata and deported. It wasn't until 1988 that Dolce went to court and copped a plea. He is now cooperating with the government.
He first contacted the military attaché of the South African embassy in
WMAR in Baltimore reported on Dolce's day in court.
Today, under a plea agreement, Dolce admitted to one espionage-related offense and promised to cooperate with the FBI. Dolce now faces a maximum 10 years in prison. If convicted of other espionage charges, he could have faced life in prison or even death. Prosecutors said they decided on the lesser charge to ensure Dolce's cooperation and their continuing investigation of spying by South Africa. At federal court, Joan Garland, Channel 2 News.
The South African embassy wants to forget the whole matter, issuing this statement.
We consider this whole thing history. South Africa does not consider itself an unfriendly nation to the USA and does not compete globally with the USA in any terms whatsoever. The whole case does not imply that U.S. military security was breached.
But intelligence analysts say the South African espionage network is growing. Author Tom Allen wrote a book on the top spy cases of the decade.
I've been very surprised by
the way some intelligence officials talk almost admiringly of the South African effort in the United States. They're following the lead of big spy apparatuses such as the KGB, the CIA, the Mossad of Israel.
Congress is concerned about Pretoria's clandestine operations here, including recent attempts to smuggle data on F-16 fighter jets. Stephen Morrison.
The case revealed that this was probably but the tip of the iceberg as far as the smuggling of critical technology intelligence to South Africa, an operation directed out of the South African embassy.
One footnote, we attempted to interview Tom Dolce, but we were told that he's being held at an undisclosed federal correction center where his debriefing continues. He's scheduled to be sentenced in 2 weeks and will report on the case then.
Mzwakhe Mbuli is known as the people's poet for his fiery anti-apartheid writing. We showed you one of his performances a few weeks ago.
I am more creative than ever before. I am more calm than ever before. I am more composed than ever before. I am more cautious than ever before. I am more careful than ever before. Yes,
on March 17th, Mbuli was arrested after the police raided his home and claimed to have found a bomb. The poet had recently been released from detention, where he was held in solitary confinement for 6 months without charges or trial. Another South African artist is our focus this week, Mbongeni Ngema, the creator of Sarafina, one of South Africa's most poignant cultural exports. It's a Broadway smash and will soon be going on the road to Japan. Ngema recently dropped by South Africa Now studios to see our show and to talk with Caroline Craven.
Sarafina sort of occupied my life. I was just surrounded by Sarafina since then until we opened at Lincoln Center. As soon as we opened, then I went to the piano again and started figuring out what I would do. And what came out was, I think I was missing South Africa so much that what came out was the beauty of the landscape, like a piece like Africa.
This is the time to unite. This is the time to unite. Margaret Thatcher telling you.
The song is A Time to Unite from Ngema's new solo album, sung with the cast of Sarafina.
Margaret Thatcher, Africa.
Ngema is also an actor, seen here in this production of Waza Albert.
How is he coming to South Africa? By South African Airways Jumbo Jet, and all the pressmen will be there. And SABC television cameras, and BBC, and even our Prime Minister. Thank you. I don't think you can separate politics and art in South Africa. I think it's just one and the same thing, because politics have become part of our lives. I think it's simply because we're oppressed so much that our culture gets better and better all the time, because we always have something to fight against.
Freedom!
Nobody expected that the show would run for so long, that it would be a success. We just thought we're coming in for 10 weeks at the Lincoln Center and then we'll be gone. I think the thing is, with South Africans, every one of us is always so homesick, because besides the problems that are there, but the country is so beautiful and people are such beautiful human beings there. And there's a spirit of brotherhood, of oneness in the township. There's just the vibe that you can never find anywhere else in the world, and it makes South Africans always want to go home.
Times of unity and harmony are calling. Prejudice and confusion be gone.
Thank you for watching South Africa Now. Transcripts are available for $3. Please ask for show 208. For a free resource list or to share your comments, send a stamped self-addressed envelope to South Africa Now, the Africa Fund, 198 Broadway, New York, New York, 10038. South Africa Now is produced on a non-profit basis by Global Vision in association with the Africa Fund.